When did you first realize that making art was something you wanted to pursue?
So I have kind of an unusual pathway to the arts. I never enjoyed art as a kid. I didn't like my art classes. I didn't like drawing. And so it never was something that I had considered as a career pathway. But I did know that I was interested in color and space. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe interior design is for me. And so when I was in my undergraduate, I originally started as an interior design major and then realized that interior design is a lot of figuring out where an outlet needs to go, figuring out traffic patterns. And I was like, this isn't for me. It was in the art department, so I kept taking art classes. And that's where I discovered art that really expanded my idea of what art could be, like sculpture, conceptual art, where people were like taking a walk and saying that's a drawing. And all of a sudden I was like, maybe I am an artist. I just didn't know.
Your work explores the intersection of humans and technology. What drew you to those themes?
So I started my art journey as a ceramicist, and I was really drawn to making things with my hands, using clay, which comes from the earth. And I thought, I never want to have to touch a screen. I hated my like Photoshop class in college. I just didn't want to do any of it. But I knew I was interested in like what was happening in our digital lives. I was in college when people really like first started getting on social media, and it just was like this explosion of like what does this new thing mean for us as people and the way that we relate to one another. And so one day I was in the ceramics lab and I was like looking at all of these materials that were around me, and I realized that the powders I was using to make colored glaze were things like copper and cobalt and lithium, and all of these things that I realized were also in my phone and made our digital technologies work. And so that kind of opened my mind to thinking that I didn't have to choose between making with my hands and making about technology. I could merge those into one thing. I am of the generation who will be one of the last people who knows what life was like before the internet. My family got our first PC computer when I was 6. And I remember spending time playing computer games, but also having a book beside me because it would take so long for the next page of your computer game to load. And so having this relationship where technology was entering our lives, but it was this very slow process that had an extraordinary amount of glitches all the time. Your computer game would crash, you'd never get to the next level. And so I think that that really shaped my experiences as a kid. And then I didn't get my first smartphone until the year 2014. I was a pretty late adopter to that technology. And one thing that I noticed in kind of those first years when other people had smartphones, but I didn't have a smartphone, was just how all encompassing smartphones became and how frequently in conversation people would get distracted by their phones. And since I didn't have a smartphone, I couldn't distract myself with my phone. And so, really feeling like we as humans were changing in some fundamental ways very, very quickly because of these objects that we were now carrying. And so, I think a lot about how smartphones are this object that we connect with mentally, but they do have this physical presence and substance. And so your smartphone has 63 different materials. It's got strengthened glass, it's got plastic, it's got all of these earth metals, minerals. And so when you carry your phone in your pocket, you're carrying these distant geographies and economies and politics within your pocket. And what a wild thing that we're all carrying this around and getting rid of them every 2 years because there's a new upgrade, right? And so it is like this very like ethereal thing where it's like we're putting things in the cloud and it feels so abstracted from physicality, but it is powered by these physical things. And that's just really captivated my imagination these last several years.
Is there a piece or moment in your work that you feel captures your ideas the most clearly?
For me, in the show that I have at PCC, in the corner, there's a painting that says, "What a time to be alive." And then right next to it, there's these headphones. And when you put on the headphones, there's this 1 minute sound piece. And the sound piece is this AI voice repeating the words, "What a time to be alive." But every time the AI voice says it says it in a different tone. And so sometimes it's like, "What a time to be alive." And other times it's like, "What a time to be alive." And it just like captures everything I was thinking about in terms of what's happening in our moment. What does it mean to be a human when machines are becoming more human-like? And so I feel like those two pieces just kind of capture everything that was happening in my brain and asking what is happening in our moment.
When people experience your work, your art, what do you hope they'll take away emotionally or intellectually?
I hope that people spend time thinking about what they think about artificial intelligence. I think that artificial intelligence right now, we are hearing about it all the time in a lot of different aspects of life, and it's kind of an emotional issue in terms of, is it going to steal our jobs, or will it be the best thing that's ever happened to us? So I think that I want people to kind of remain open when they come to the show and think about both the possibilities and the pitfalls with artificial intelligence. Back when ChatGPT got released to the public, it was November of 2022, and I was teaching a digital tools class at PSU. And I thought, wow, we're going to have to talk about this. I need to figure out how this tool works, how we can think about it as artists. And, it's a very complicated topic, but my students and I started having discussions about, is it okay for artists to use this? What does it mean that we know that this tool is being trained on other artists' work who aren't being acknowledged or paid for their work? And so it opens up a lot of new possibilities, but it also can harm artists. And so what do we do with this tool? And so I had my students start engaging with it a little bit. I started engaging with it in my own personal practice. And it's a really interesting thing to be thinking about, can I use an AI tool and consider it my work? I found that there were certain things I was comfortable with and certain things that I wasn't comfortable with. I felt like I really needed to add my own touches to the images that AI was generating in order for it to feel like my work. And if you've ever used an AI image generator, you pretty quickly realize that it's not making very original images. They're pretty generic. And so it was really hard to use AI to make something that felt like my work. Where I felt like AI surprised me a little bit in terms of making art was using AI voice models to read texts that I had written. And all of a sudden, I felt like those tools became a little bit more of an exchange between me and the AI, where the AI was surprising me and reading things in ways that I just wasn't expecting. And so all of a sudden, the machine's tone and inflection was adding new meaning to my work. And so I felt like that's where I really found like a generative place to use AI and feel like this is interesting work.
So more like a collaborative with AI in a way, and instead of having it do everything for you and come up with things for you.
When I started making the show, I thought, I'm going to let AI define the aesthetics. I'm going to write prompts that image generators can then use, and then I will try to make sculptures in response to those images. And I spent lots of time reading articles about how you make a good prompt. I had ChatGPT make my prompts. And I just found that it was really hard to make anything with AI image generators that felt original or felt new. And I think because it can only work from what it's already been trained on, that it's really hard to get AI to move in that direction. Now, I think there is a caveat to that where maybe if you are more than a user, if you're a coder or a software designer, you might be able to design your own AI model. And that might be where creativity in AI models could really flourish at this moment. But I think for me, coming from the perspective of someone who uses these technologies, I really just found that there was kind of a lack of creativity or a lack of originality to create anything that felt new. And I think for people who are learning to make art or learning to write or learning to make video, there is kind of this tension where you're learning to use this medium. And for all artists, we can never quite make what's in our head. And that's why you have to make another piece or write another essay. And I think that struggle between what's in our head and what we're actually capable of is important. And I think that some artists might try to kind of circumvent that tension by using these tools. But I struggle to see that there will be a whole lot of originality or creativity in that work when you don't have that struggle, because I think that's important to the creative process and to becoming a better artist, writer, thinker. And so I think that struggle is important for us as humans.
What else do you feel like you want listeners to know about you, about your projects?
In my work, I think about how digital technologies and humans and landscapes mutually shape one another. And I'm very interested in thinking about what our connected lives mean, but also thinking about what those things mean for the environment. And so a lot of my work visually, when you look at it, incorporates natural elements into the work, which I think isn't always what people expect to see when they go to a show that is about technology. And so one thing I'm really interested in is making work that's about technology, but might not initially look like it's about technology. And I think conceptually for me, that stems from kind of this feeling that I have that technology kind of mediates everything we do as humans right now. You know, when I want to navigate the world or the landscape, I turn on Google Maps and it tells me how to get there. And when I want to talk to my family that's far away, I pull up a screen and we look at each other from, thousands of miles apart. Even when I want to figure out what I'm going to make for dinner, I look up a recipe online. And so all of these things that are primary points of being human are now being navigated through digital technologies. And so I think that's always what I'm driving at in my work and in my thinking.